and communication breakdown, where like each side you find like working in silos and collaboration's actually like reactive rather than proactive. And so, noticing those signs early, we use actually this phrase called like, expectation gaps a lot. So like, how do you realize that you're like having different expectation gaps, and how do you then like work through and align on like what each other's expectations are and meet in the middle?
Welcome to Concept to Care, where we hear candid stories of success and failure, discuss strategy, and dive into the details that offer advice on what to do and what not to do in health tech.
Whether you're a seasoned pro, growing your career, or just starting out, our aim for this podcast is to be relevant, real world, and tactical. We're dedicated to not only entertaining you all, but also empowering you with actionable insights that can be applied beyond the podcast, one concept at a time.
This is Angela.
And this is Omar.
Welcome to Concept to Care.
Today, we are joined by Ari Saft, VP of Product at TIA, a company revolutionizing women's healthcare by blending virtual and in-person healthcare services. In this episode, we explore the critical relationship between product and operations in a tech-enabled healthcare services org, how to strengthen those relationships, how to design organizations for success, and the operational hurdles that come with major system migrations. Ari also shares key indicators for when the relationship isn't working well and how to identify those red flags before moving toward a better, more collaborative dynamic. With nearly 5 years of experience at TIA, Ari offers a unique perspective on what it takes to align product and operations for sustainable growth and success in healthcare. We hope you enjoy.
Hi, Ari. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Omar. Hey, Angela. How are you?
Good. We're super excited for this. So why don't we go ahead and get started? And it would be great if you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So, hey, everyone. My name is Ari Saft. I'm the VP of Product at TIA, a healthcare company that provides primary care and gynecology care to women. I ended up in this role because I actually started my career as a elementary school teacher with Teach for America. And my first year teaching, I had 36 students in my classroom with just me. And so I brought computers into the classroom and really saw firsthand the power that technology can have to empower people and processes. From there, I've worked in ed tech and healthcare, and I've been at TIA since February 2020.
That's amazing. So you mentioned your VP of product at TIA. We want to spend some time talking about TIA's business model and vision. So TIA's undergone significant evolution over the past 8 years, and you've been with the company for almost 5. Can you share a little bit of how TIA's business model and core vision has developed over time, and what are the driving forces behind some of that change?
So TIA's changed a lot, but throughout TIA's existence, the mission of the company actually hasn't changed. It's to help women reach their optimal health goals. The tactics on how to get there are really what's changed. TIA actually started as a birth control recommendation app. And after like 200,000 conversations, the two founders realized that women needed a place to get care. And they stood up a in real life clinic in New York in like 8 months. And then the plan was like, have these in real life clinics in different cities. And then COVID happened and we, needed to stand up a virtual clinic. And then this evolution of TIA became, how can you have in real life and virtual care supporting women? And that's evolved now to partnerships with health systems. But truly, like, at the core of this has always been helping women and listening to our users, what they want and what they need. And I think, one of my favorite things about working at TIA is that people really follow this mantra of strong beliefs loosely held. People are willing to experiment, try new things, and evolve their thinking. And because that like vision North Star has been so secure the entire time, it's just like constantly trying new things in order to achieve this goal. When your North Star is not shifting, it's like a lot, I wouldn't say easier, but everyone is kind of like rowing the boat in the same direction, even if the ideas can be contradictory.
That's really awesome that there was stability with the North Star and gave you the latitude because you were stable in that area to be able to experiment. One of the areas that we wanted to dive a little bit deeper into is the relationship between product and operations. So with TIA starting with that single clinic in New York, it seems like you all still have a very product-driven culture. And so tell us a little bit about the relationship between product and operations And how has that evolved as the company has grown to the model that you described today? And what challenges do you face in maintaining this type of balance?
So, as you mentioned, Tia has grown from a single clinic to a much more complex operation. There are, I think it's like 10 plus clinics now in Arizona, LA, New York, San Francisco. And this relationship between product and ops has really naturally evolved over time. Early on, product called the shots. We moved quickly, we drove the culture, but as we scaled, operations needed to be more in focus so that we could deliver consistently across clinics. At the beginning, you have those power users that really have stars in their eyes when they think of Tia. And now we're at the point where, someone who might not have ever heard of Tia, finds it off an ad, and we have to make sure that they're going to get really good, consistent care. And I think the biggest challenge has been balancing innovation with the practicalities of running an efficient, reputable, and repeatable processes in care delivery. So we're constantly trying to align product vision with operational realities, ensuring that what we build truly supports frontline teams without slowing them down. And so it's just a constant push and pull in both of those anchors.
Can you share a story about one time that maybe stands out to you with the push and pull, and how did it ultimately end up resolving?
Yeah, I have a great example right now. We are in the midst of rethinking how we handle scheduling. So as you can imagine, scheduling is the backbone of any care delivery business, and taking one scheduling software and replacing it with another scheduling software, that's a really big deal. And so if you did it all at once, by the way, Tia is a very firm believer in agile development, which also can come at a head with operations as well. So, we didn't want to just replace everything at once. We wanted to do it iteratively and learn. And when we first brought this up with the operations team, it was very much we can't do that. We can't teach all of our frontline team, our providers, this new system. We just can't do it. And that was where we started. And today we are iteratively working through moving from our old scheduling system to our new. And the way we did this is really followed a thoughtful collaboration process. We started out with what are you scared of? And kind of went through all of the things that people were scared of. And this was, people feeling insecure in their job, all the way down to us missing utilization numbers. And then we built our acceptance criteria around these kind of fears, and ensured that we had check-ins that we'd be getting feedback on these pieces of fear. So if it was around utilization, every time we deployed a slice, we would check in and be hey, how does utilization with old system compare to new system? We actually had an ops representative in all of the meetings. And so we kind of create these, cross-functional tiger teams for big initiatives. And so there was a provider representative, there's an operational representative, and everyone was on the same page of how we were working. And then there was also just some push and pull on release dates. And so product wanted things out really quickly, and the operations team was no, we need to train people. And so we found this middle ground of actually using super users and having a subset of different users on the front line who were either culture carriers or managers start using the product and staging first, so that when we went live, we, one, had feedback, and then two, they could kind of share with teammates who were confused how to answer questions. And so far so the way we kind of split it up is we did it by slices of specialties, and we were 3/4 of the way through all of our specialties. And so far it's going well. But I think that this really, one of our bigger cross-functional projects, and really set a good foundation for how teams can work together.
It sounds like one of the things that I've done is a pre-mortem, right? So you're sort of at the beginning of the project trying to figure out all the points of failure. And I really like your twist on it, which is, what are you afraid of?
Yeah, at Tia, we use this phrase safe to try. And so, how do you create the conditions of being safe to try? And in order to figure that out, it's what is it safe to try? And flipping that on its head. And I think that, for anyone who's worked at a care delivery startup from the beginning, like you move really fast, I hate this phrase, but like break things. And I think there becomes a little bit of like PTSD for the operations team where they're like, oh my God, like another thing that can disrupt the way we do things. And then the opposite happens where it's like no more changes. But in reality, like the changes are theoretically good. And so it's about building that trust and relationship, and then also having that feedback loop when something is not good, like being able to address it really quickly. So they're just like not living with chaos.
So you described early on, product was kind of driving, and then operations sort of, as the company had scaled, the relationship between product and operations had become a little bit more hard. Can you share some of those challenges that you've encountered as you were, directly related to scale, and how did you address those specifically?
As we've scaled, one big challenge has been ensuring our product builds align with the on-the-ground needs of providers and our care team. So with more clinics and teams, it's harder to keep everyone in sync. For example, rolling out new tools without fully understanding the operational impact has led to workflow disruptions because there's like, as a PM, like I can't know every single way the tool is being used anymore. It's not 10 people. To address this, we've focused on tighter collaboration with the ops team early in the product life cycle. We bring them into discovery and design phases very early. And we've also implemented more structured feedback loop to catch issues faster and make adjustments for bigger and wider rollouts. And this has helped bridge that gap between like innovation and operational efficiency.
Can you talk more about those feedback loops?
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways we do it. We have informal and formal. One of the amazing things about TIA is that we actually employ all of our care team. And so they are all on the Slack with you. And so if something is going wrong, you hear about it really quickly, which is really positive as a product manager. Being able to like get that instant feedback can be a little overwhelming, but it is really positive. And so we do have the informal, like someone sends a DM and is like, how do I get out of this screen? And you're like, the UX did not make sense. And then we also have formal, which is, satisfaction with tools is really important to us. We know that it impacts retention. And so doing surveys on, how is the tool best serving you, shadowing, looking at efficiency of different workflows and time studies. And then we do cross-functional feedback meetings biweekly. And how we've oriented them are not like bring what you want, but bring the problem. And so we have a group of people and they're bringing the problem. And then together we're collaborating on, can we fix this with an operational change? Does it need a product change? What's the minimal product change we can do? And that's been really great.
We faced similar stuff at Cerebral. I mean, we built the platform from the ground up, similar to you all. And I think you as a product manager who's been there so long, you're like, I know like pretty much everything about the product. And so it's like, I'm going to go to Ari. I'm going to ping Ari about this specific thing. Unfortunately, like that just doesn't like scale well, right? So you're getting 40 pings a day. Eventually, we got to the point where it's not, I know the answer. I want to help you, but there's a priority to everything. Like I kind of need to discourage this DM right now, and I have to funnel you to a process, right? So have you guys stood up like a intake in Slack or like a Jira ticket system or something that can actually like take those and get them triaged?
I'm smiling because yes, exactly same experience. There's a couple different things we've done. I will admit, as you're moving really quickly at the beginning of standing something up, you might not always take the moment to write really good documentation. If I could go back to former RE self 4 years ago, I would have been like, document everything. And now I'm a little document czar for all of the PMs that I manage. And that has been really helpful. We actually just implemented Guru for our frontline team. And so we, in partnership with clinical and operations, have been ensuring that, all of our different tech stack, that the documentation's up to date. And so they can ask Guru, like, hey, Guru, how do I close a clinical note? And that comes up. And that's been really helpful. In terms of other random questions that come up. If it's just like a question about how product works, we have cross-functional channels where the expectation is like 24 to 48 hour response time unless you write like urgent. And then if there's bugs, we have a Jira service desk integration. And just we triage those based on, urgency and impact. But that's been helping I definitely still get the occasional DM, especially from people who've been at Tia a really long time and know that I'll answer it. But those, at least having the like biweekly space to share what's happening or those channels for more urgent issues, it's like at least kept it a little bit more structured. And in those places, we get a lot of ideas and feedback to make the product better. So it's like good that they're out in the open because it sparks more conversation.
We asked how many or like some of the challenges that you've experienced as you've scaled that you were able to address. I'm wondering if there are any that just have not like still prominent, still exist, have not been able to address.
I still think we're figuring out how training works. I think everyone acknowledges how important training is, but there's a balance between like, how do you find enough time on the calendars for providers? How do you ensure utilization is not impacted? And then training materials, like what's the best way to train someone on different like types of changes? And so I think that's an area we're still evolving, especially this year. We're in the midst of like a big tech stack migration, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But that type of change is just so much bigger than like, hey, we added an extra like button that lets you flag important conversations. So I think that's something we're still learning. And then on the product management side, we're just a small, scrappy team. And I wish that we did a better job at like soliciting ideas from the rest of the company. Right now, it's in these cross-functional meetings and we have processes with other team members of how they elevate ideas and problems, but it's like pretty like a couple people who are sharing it and we're working on these big projects. And so it's hard to like get the smaller idea in. And I think in a dream world, the way that like bugs funnel through, we'd also have ideas and we'd be able to really like talk to our stakeholders about them and before they come either like burning fire or, you know, part of OKR planning. So that's something that I just like wish we did better, but there's only so much time in the day.
I'm going to pull on a couple of things that you said. I think number one, a really great tip is to document everything. Oftentimes I find myself kicking myself because we made certain product decisions and at a time we had great rationale. And then fast forward 3 or 4 years, people are like, well, why did you do it this way? And then the details become super fuzzy. And I'm like, well, I know that we made a really smart decision based on the information we had at the time, but I wish I could recall the specifics. I think that also, you know, when you were talking about the training, we were all sort of smiling because that is a point of contention when you work for a care delivery organization is, you know, sort of this tension between building the product with wizards and tutorials and making it super easy versus like ops having to bear the burden of pulling people off of their phones or what have you to attend a more analog type of training. So that's definitely something that is a challenge that I've seen across the board.
Yeah. And I think also different people just learn differently too. And so, you know, I also in the field of medicine, like a lot of the providers we have like are incredible doctors, but not necessarily like really good at working, you know, workflow tools. And so like, how do you then set them up for success?
We wanted to ask you a little bit about, have you had an experience where the relationship has been strained with ops? And what do you do? Like, how were you able to identify it before it really deteriorated? Do you have any stories you'd like to share or any guidance that you have for how to navigate these things?
Yeah, I think there's some signs. I am very lucky that the core group of people that I work with, we've worked together a long time. And so I think there's a lot of trust built up. And so you're able to really use radical candor in conversations. They can be tough and hard, but we know that like we're all coming from like the same good place and oriented around the same goals. But, you know, it can be sometimes hard to like know that's about to happen. And so some signs really include like misalignment on priorities when we're like pushing things that operations like might not really want or need, or the team struggles to adopt. Another sign is like feedback gaps when like operations feels their input isn't being considered early enough, when there's frustration with the tools that actually like disrupt instead of enhance workflows, and communication breakdown where like each side you find like working in silos and collaboration's actually like reactive rather than proactive. And so, you know, noticing those signs early, we use actually this phrase called like expectation gaps a lot. So like, how do you realize that you're like having different expectation gaps, and how do you then like work through and align on like what each other's expectations are and meet in the middle? And so I think we're like constantly doing that because, as an operator, you're not going to understand everything product wants, and product's not going to understand everything that operations is doing. And I have this analogy that I like to use called the pizza analogy. It's real silly, but like, let's just say, providers want a Hawaiian pizza, and like, the virtual support team wants like sausage and onions, and product says like, you can have a vegetarian pizza. And so it's about like coming together and realizing that like a vegetarian pizza is really yummy and it has all the veggies that you all wanted. You're just like not going to get your meat. And so like, that's kind of like how we've tried to do it.
I like this idea that you name things too. I think when you attach a name to it, then I feel like it's this common vernacular for you to identify it, name it, talk openly about it.
It makes it also feel less heavy and personal. You're just like, hey, we have misaligned expectations. We call it like, let's go from like confusion to clarity, and like come up with a plan to like get us both on the same page. It sounds a little cultish, but like it does work.
No, but it's expensive. It's expensive. I've seen it happen multiple times where people are not operating on the same set of definitions, but they're talking about the same thing and they're in agreement. Like they're actually in agreement, but they don't realize they are, and they're just, talking circles. So we've talked a little bit about kind of how, the tough parts of product and operations relationships. Let's talk about how to move towards like a more productive relationship together. So now that we've outlined those signs that you mentioned of a strained relationships, let's talk about how we remedy them.
Yeah. So I actually think that having a strained relationship between ops and product is a good thing for excellent product development. It keeps PMs on their toes. It ensures that like operations has a ton of input in what you're building. And I think when you're building product for a care delivery business, like it's not like we're selling our tech. Like we're building in service of people. And so it's important that those people are like leading the charge. And I think that often people say like, oh, the PM's like the CEO of the company or of the product. And like, that's not the case when you are building for a care delivery business. Like you are in service of others. And so I actually think that strained relationship, maybe strain's the wrong word because it has like a negative connotation, but like that push and pull is so crucial for like building a good thing. And so I think, it's involving operations early so that, both teams are clear on what's being built. It's implementing those structured channels like I talked about, and, having those cross-functional syncs, encouraging open dialogue, and like really having trust that like the ultimate goal that we're all aligned on is in agreement, and, having those checks for understanding of like, this is what we're doing and this is why, and explaining it.
Can you talk about what you found to be the most effective strategies that you've implemented to foster this type of collaboration that we're talking about, and making sure that there isn't that expectation gap and all parties are aligned? I'd love to hear maybe around like road mapping and like how often do you visit those things?
Yeah. So first off, I think the most effective thing that we've done is embed operational team members like directly into the product development process. So like we have someone whose job is called clinical product, and they are essentially like the liaison in between. And then we have someone on care operations, and they're the liaison in between, and product enablement. And so like everyone is kind of like aware of what teams are working on, and the person who has the pulse of what's coming. In terms of road mapping, we do OKR planning like most companies, big OKR planning at the halves. Sometimes we'll do quarter check-ins. Something I've learned over the last, decade plus in product development is like, ask an engineering team to predict 6 months out is not happening. And so we try and do quarterly planning with our engineering pods, but we set expectations with our cross-functional stakeholders that like, these are very big blocks with error bars. And this is like the range of when we want things done. And the way we think of road mapping is like, we have the big projects, which is like things that are coming out in iterative slices, and the people who need to know when the small slices are coming out are in the know. And then we have smaller things that like we just keep people up to date on. And so how I work with my PMs is we set a quarter roadmap, and then we share that out. And then every week in as kind of a sync together, we go over it and we're like, how are things moving? Like, do we need to pull things in? And, especially at an early stage company, like the world changes really quickly. And so like what you said you were going to do in January might not be what you're doing in May. And so we're just like constantly having those conversations and asking ourselves, like, is the impact of the work and the effort, like, is that a good ratio? And are we impacting the most important metric right now? And I think that like our teams have gotten really used to not like huge shifts and changes, but like acknowledging that other more important things could pop up or timelines go longer. And I think where we're really like trying to figure out right now is how do you plan for delays? So, we'll talk about it in a little bit, but like we are rebuilding our electronic health record to use MedPlum, and like that's going to be a huge thing for our providers. And the way that we're doing that is we picked a test market to test in slices, and then we're going to do like a big rollout to the rest of our markets. And those dates might change. Like we don't know what they are now, and yet so how do we like protect against that? Like we've blocked out time in the calendar, and if it shifts, like what do we need to do? And so right now we're working on like backup plans. And so like, do you still train people and then there's a delay, or like what that looks like? So contingency planning, basically.
Yeah, it's challenging because there is uncertainty in how development is. It's science and art, right? You can do a great job estimating, but at the end of the day, it's just an estimate. I think where I've run into challenges is people love quarters. Like, okay, tell me what quarter you're going to deliver this, right? So when I proposed the now, next, later roadmap, it didn't go over great because we had people in, customer facing roles who are like, well, this customer wants this, like what quarter can we tell them? And so, yeah, I think very similar challenges to what you're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard because I have such deep empathy. Is like providers need to know in their day when something's going to change. And like the operations team has such a heavy listing to train new people and like create all these training material. And so like a moving date is really hard. So one thing that we've played a lot with is like feature flags. So like we'll continue developing and getting things out. And then the partnership between product and ops will decide like when is the moment in time that we like open up the feature flag. So that's been really, really helpful.
We've talked about cross-functional teams a bit. I want to double click into the structure of how that's being done at TIA. So, to ensure effective collaboration between those two groups, are there any specific roles or processes that have been like crucial in making that cross-functional structures work?
Yeah. So in terms of an org structure, we have two main orgs. We have the innovation org and then the clinical and operational org. So in the innovation org, it's like product, engineering, growth, marketing, that stuff. And then clinical and operations is what you'd imagine, like markets, operation, real estate, et cetera. And so what we've done is, as I mentioned, we have like roles that really cross into the different sides of the company. So a clinical product role where like they are embedded in a lot of the processes that we do on the product side. That could be like coming to our grooming sessions, coming to our design syncs. And so they're really involved in those rituals. Same on the clinical side and on the operational side. And so and then on the product side, we'll like go to their meetings too. One other thing that we have done is I actually manage a team called product enablement. And essentially what that means is we're thinking a lot about like the cost to build and ensuring that we really, really understand the problem before we build it. And so there's actually an offshore team that we work with, and they essentially are like tech gap for us. And so they are responsible for a process that's often like was historically run operationally. We'll then like move it to product enablement, and our PMs will spend a lot of time with those individuals understanding like what are the problems, what's really working well, and then we'll productize it. And so that process has been really amazing to kind of give ops a little bit of like breathing room, and then also us to like learn really closely with this team before building the wrong thing.
So that last thing you said there, like the tech enablement team, picking what to tech enable first or next is hard. So do you have a framework or a process for selecting the next thing to automate or tech enable?
It goes both bottoms up and top down. I think the most important thing is like, there's a lot of metrics you can move, but like, what's the most important one that we're like, the team is orienting around? And I think it goes back to what we were talking about before with like people being on the same page. So if like one team is trying to move, utilization and the other is trying to move new members, like there's going to be like confusion. And so I think one thing we've done really well is like, there is a metric that is the most important. The rest are really important because it has to keep the business running. But like when two things come against each other, like that one is it. And so for the last year, it's been retention. And so a lot of things play in retention. And so when thinking about like, what is the next thing, a couple factors come into mind. I'm a simple girl. I just like impact over effort a lot. I'm like, what's the impact you're going to get for the effort of work? Reach is hard at Tia because like, we have just a lot of different audiences. And so it's like, yeah, you have like 30,000 members, but like, if your 5 providers in this market can't do this thing, then like there is no care delivery. And so I tend to just think about like, what's the big problem we're trying to solve? What's the impact and effort? Can this be done by someone else? And when is the breaking point? And those kind of factors come in. And I think when you mentioned like, is it an art or a science? Like there's the science piece of like that analysis. And then there's the like intuitive, like product sense of, should we do this? Should we not? Also, I'm a big proponent, especially in care delivery businesses, of commoditization. And so like, there's also that second question of like, should you be building it? Like, is this something that like you are going to win at, or should someone else build it and like you bring that into your tech stack? And so I think all of those conversations or all of those pieces of the conversation are really important when deciding what to do. And it's a startup. So at the end of the day, it's like, is this going to break the business? How do we make sure that we're working on the thing that's going to like, that's burning the highest, or like is smoking the biggest in the background?
I have a couple of questions. So I guess when you talk about your tech enablement group, to me, that sounds like discovery. And so would you say that discovery is still baked into like all of your PM's job function? Or would you say that you separate that out into a different group and then your PM sort of take it with that information?
No, it's very much part of their job description. Like the product enablement team is doing a lot of the workflows, but they're not like, they're coming up and being like, hey, like this is a problem, or like this is something that I've seen. But the product managers are responsible for like shadowing, for participating, like helping the workflow. Like I'm a really big proponent of like getting in the weeds and doing the thing. And so that they're very much like observing and figuring out what we should build. And, back to the scheduling example, our PM who figured that out, like he's very talented at like untangling really knotty problems. And he spent like 4 months, like shadowing every which way workflow, because scheduling impacts every workflow, and basically like pulling out requirements and then getting alignment with all different teams on like what was a must have and what wasn't going to happen. And I think back to the commoditization is like, if you're going to not build it, and we were not going to build our own scheduling tool, like you're never going to get 100%. So like, what's the 80 most important? What's the 20 you're willing to like not build or be okay with, and like get everybody on board?
The other thing that I'm really impressed by is your ability to say, hey, this thing, retention in your case, is the most important thing. My experience has been more that you have all these priorities, let's say 4 or 5 priorities. All of these priorities are super high. And then when you try to execute against that, then you hit these teams that have to play a role in all of 4 or 5 priorities. And it's very challenging. And so I'm curious to know like how Tia was able to get to your one most important and then all your other also very important, but not as important as your number one.
Trying to think that everything was important and realizing that like that isn't a reality. I think you have to go through that learning process of being like, oh, we'll focus on everything. And then realizing that like it is physically impossible to focus on everything. On the product side, we have multiple pods, and each pod kind of like owns a metric. And so that is helpful. So like while, as a company, we're orienting around retention, pods have like priorities. And so oftentimes, like, for example, the growth pod, if something comes up for them that like could impact retention or could impact new members, like we'll have a conversation around like where are you going to get the most impact here? Like which one should we do? And I think that's where the art comes in, is like the pattern recognition of like, oh, we've done something similar before. We saw this amount of impact. Like this is probably the best bet with our resources. But it's hard, especially because like, while product, you're able to kind of like split it out on different teams. Like, the marketing team really cares about new members, and like the ops teams like really cares about utilization. But I think that we were able to like realize that if we don't keep members, there is no business. And so like that has to be the most important thing. And then it all kind of trickles down from there, because it's like if a provider is being rushed in their appointment and the patient feels that rush, like they're not going to enjoy the appointment. And so that's where like the efficiency and utilization comes in. Or like if you acquire the wrong patient and you're setting the wrong expectations, they're going to leave. And so I think we were able to identify that like that's the crux, and like everything actually builds off of that.
All right. So let's switch gears and talk about going from a custom built EMR to a headless one. So Tia did build its own EMR, and then now you're moving your entire care delivery model to be built on top of the MedPlum platform. And so tell us a little bit. I feel like there's a story there and maybe some learnings. So would love you if you could share that.
Yeah. First off, shout out MedPlum. You're great. Second, when Tia first started and built their first clinic in New York, they stood up their platform really quickly. And this was also of the age where like it was epic or nothing. And so, we just kept building things. And I think this period of time was also when venture dollar was a lot cheaper. And so the idea was like, we'd have this big engineering team and we'd have our own EMR, and like, we would control everything. And in the dream, like, the scheduling example I gave, in the dream, we control scheduling, because the way that appointments are connected, and like that was really important for us to like helping women achieve their optimal health goals. Like imagine you could have like, have one appointment that like ladders into another, like all these different models that would like really be unique to Tia. But the reality is like the world doesn't look like that anymore. Venture dollars are not cheap anymore, and they're being spent on not innovation, but on like profitability. And so I think we realized that we were not spending our time in engineering on anything really that was like unique to Tia and made us special and where we wanted to win. It was like we would build like a flag that, if you typed in a patient and they had a duplicate name, or like a safety alert. And it's like, why are we doing this? Like this is not unique, but it's so crucial to care delivery that there's like the product that they're using is safe. And so we started thinking about like, how do we best leverage our team so that our engineers are building the things that like are going to keep our patients here and are going to like make our team really efficient and be able to make our patients happy. And the investigation I did with our principal architect, John, is we looked at a couple different options. We were like, okay, like, do we just go to Athena? And we were like, no, like Tia is such a unique model that we need to be able to control the experience. And then we were like, okay, well, like, they have, ish headless EMR we could build on top of, and we found that it would be too restrictive. And with MedPlum, we were able to build our own UX, which is like the most important part. It was what we've been saying the entire time since the beginning, is that like experience is what drives us being able to deliver relational care, which is like going to change primary care. And that MedPlum enabled us to do it. Also, they're built on FHIR APIs, which are interoperable, and we have partnerships with health systems. And it just kind of like made a lot of sense that this was, the next step for us.
So how do you, these are major changes, right? And I'm sure it's not the only major change that's been done throughout the history of Tia. So when building product, how do you build product efficiently without creating disruption for clinical teams? Like, what strategies have you found effective, deployed to minimize operational thrash?
Well, what strategy has not been effective is when I was the PM of a very big operational change and we didn't have any training. So that was my good lesson learned in the first year of Tia. COVID had happened and we stood up a virtual clinic. And so we need to be able to like check patient in virtually. And so we built this like beautiful check-in system that like, could verify your insurance and get your payment method. And we just like, I deployed it without like, any training for our Care Coordination FDA team, and didn't go well. And so I feel like I will forever remember the look on our operations lead face, and I will never repeat that ever again. So I think, it's kind of what we talked about before, which is how understanding and working and partnering with your cross-functional team on what changes need what type of training. Something can just be an email that's sent to the group in our weekly email. Some is just so intuitive that you don't even really need to do anything. And others, it's different levels of training whether you're pulled out for in real life training, you receive a PDF. And I think as we make these bigger changes, we're recognizing that we need to give real learning time. I mean, Epic makes every provider that uses Epic do 3 weeks of training. I mean, the idea is that it's so intuitive that we wouldn't need that. But, something that I have realized over the years is that frustration with technology and inefficiencies with technology, yes, we could have built things better, but a lot of it has to do with training. And if someone is not trained on a tool, it's going to be hard. And so I think that that's kind of where we're approaching these bigger changes is ensuring that people have the understand the tools. And then something we've been doing is our VP of brand is leading these super user groups. And so it is a group of 20 people that went through this application process, providers, frontline team, and every week they meet and have a really honest conversation about what's being designed, the North Star vision, and give feedback. They test things early. I'm not even allowed in the session. It's the PMs and them. It's very tight knit. And I think that's been really useful too.
So you're currently undergoing this transition to MedPlum. What are the key lessons that you have learned so far? And I guess just tell us about how it's going. And if somebody else is going through this right now, what would you tell them?
Well, we're very much at the beginning of this transition, but already have a lot of learnings. I think 2 really stand out for me. One is we are so used to the technical talk, headless EMR, fire standard APIs, that it's really important to spend the time to write the story and help the ultimate users understand what's going to happen and why and what it will look like. And I think something that, Tia's done really well, and hats off to Ali, our VP of brand, is built that vision together. And so it wasn't just oh, this thing is coming, ? Or iterative slices and you don't know where it is going. But at the same time, they're seeing this is the long-term North Star vision. And now we're working on these small pieces that get us there. And so I think that's been a really important learning. And the second is just the importance of thorough planning and phase rollouts to minimize disruption. I think at first there was a lot of fear on the ops side of what is this going to look like? Are you just going to completely change how we write documentation, how we learn about patients, blah, blah, blah. And we've had to be very, very thoughtful about what we do first, because we're moving not just from a new AMR, but it's an iPad app to a web app. And another, we want to do this because long-term it will enable us to develop faster and be able to address changes faster. It's just going to take us a little time to get there. And so we've had to be really thoughtful about what does that look like? I think I mentioned before, a test clinic and then a bigger rollout. We're doing appointment prep first. So getting the clinical resources in MedPlum first, so that that's the first thing that providers are really working on. We've done some virtual support team workflows also, labs and fax. And so we're introducing it in ways that make sense with the broader organization's goals. Oh, I think the third is kind of related to the first is timing. When you're not in the weeds of product development, the timeline of product development is confusing. And so having people being okay, you said you wanted this thing. Why isn't it here tomorrow? And we're oh no, this is a year, 2 year thing. This is really big. And so I think that has also been a good, important learning of how do you help people understand why the product development process can seem slow to them.
All right, I wanted to ask you about metrics, and I'm asking for myself, please help me with this. Metrics between commercial or GMs and operations, clinical operations, and that in a tech-enabled services environment, it's really hard to discern what does product own, what does the GM own, or what does clinical or operations own. And I don't think I've been a part of a place that's really figured that out. So like, how do you guys think about that? Like, who really owns what and what makes sense in your mind? Current state versus ideal state.
Yeah, I don't think it's super clean and it's hard. Product is interesting because we own, I wouldn't say we own, we're inputters into everything, but it's not like our solo metric. And so like, ops team, utilization and provider NPS, like the growth team, new members. And so we kind of are like inputters in it. And I think the way we think about it is a lot with the OKR structure is like when we're going through OKR planning, we have like leads who are responsible for like a work stream. And then the kind of the projects underneath get their own we call them RPs, responsible parties. And so you have the owner of a metric, which might be like collections, and that's, our RCM person, but all of the different people underneath have like a mini metric that they're responsible for. And the idea is if like everyone's succeeding on their mini metric, the big metric is going to win. And then the person in charge of the big metric is responsible for like diagnosing when it's off and like working with the like whoever it might be that is causing the mini metric to go down. So I think there's kind of like a scaled thing that's happening there. It's not perfect. I think it's really hard because like everything is so interconnected, right? I think it goes back to like really close cross-functional communication. We have an operating metrics review meeting every other week where like people who are leading teams are hearing like in the weeds, like this is how many appointments we had. This is how many members we grew. So like you're getting that input and kind of understanding how that's going to impact other decisions. But when I hire, that's really what I look for more than anything is like, can you make those connections and not just like take the information as face value? Because it's so hard when you like own things with other people.
We've really loved diving into Tia. It's definitely a company that is very interesting that we've been following for a while. Can you tell us a little bit about what's coming up for Tia?
Yeah, we're growing. So we're adding another clinic in West Hollywood very soon and more to come in 2025. We hope to continue delivering excellent care to women, especially preventative care, because we know preventative care really, pays dividends, not for us as humans in the future, but also our insurance companies. We also have a couple new fun product lines that we have in beta right now. If you're in New York or Arizona, we're testing out some cosmetic derm like Botox, chemical peels, things like that, because feeling good about yourself also helps your body too. So more to come.
And I think it's time to move into our exciting concept closing call.
Cool.
So first, and we've talked about frameworks, but just are there any frameworks, methods, or processes that you found to be especially useful just in your work that others may also find useful?
I think I mentioned this, but I'm a very simple girl. Impact and effort. How much bang do I get for my buck? Like that really drives my day to day.
Can you tell us about a tool that is highly valuable to you that you think others may not be using and should?
I don't think I'm using anything that other PMs aren't, but the combination of my like Notes app, Chat GPT, FigJam, and Loom is like controlling my life.
Loom. God, I love that.
Loom now integrates with Confluence.
Demos?
Well, now integrates with Confluence and it can help you with documentation, which I have to admit is my like Achilles heel. So I like been really enjoying that.
Oh, I love it.
Transcripts of your Loom and just like putting that in your documentation. It's great.
Yeah, that's solid. Are there any concepts in healthcare that excite you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sound trite, but like I'm really excited about the application of AI in healthcare. I'm less excited about the idea of AI replacing providers. I actually think the relationship between provider and patient is like absolutely crucial. I'm most interested in how we can use AI to create efficiencies, especially in like care delivery practices, so that we can enable patients and providers to spend more time with each other and not like doing admin tasks.
Do you think that product management is a science or an art?
Cop out. I think it's both. You have the science part, which is like data analysis, strategy, market research, measuring how much, how much impact something had. And then you have the art, which is like intuition, leadership to innovate, inspire teams, understanding customer needs. Like you have to balance these two in order to be successful and build user-centric products.
And lastly, where can people get in contact with you if they want to reach out? And do you have any shameless plugs?
Oh, yeah. ari.w.saft@gmail.com. And then please check out AskTia.com and use promo code ARI445 and it'll get you $50 off your annual membership.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well,
yeah. I came with...
That's a first for Concept to Care. I think we're going to definitely put that in the show notes and then
good.
The
and then send
post.
Me feedback on everything you don't like. That's what I want.
I mean, we love this. I'm glad to be, providing financial value for the first time to our audience.
Well, now I can track how much by using my own code. So, I'm curious.
Yeah. All right. Well, Ari, thank you so much for coming on the show. Angela and I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to the show. If you liked this episode, don't forget to leave us a rating and a review on your podcast app of choice. And make sure to click the follow button so you never miss a new episode. This episode was produced and edited by Marvin Yue with research help from Aditya Triya. We're Angela and Omar, and you've been listening to Concept to Care.